Hey guys, I'm Brent.
I'm Lila, and you can find us on the web at www.braintrustlive.com.
That's right.
We come to you after 2 weeks away because we took Brent's birthday week off. So if you
I was
want to
turning
wish,
40, guys.
it was a big birthday.
It took longer to recover.
Plus, you had to do extra festivities because it was on a 10-year cycle.
Right.
You have to
Yeah.
on the tens. You have to go big. You can't just,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
especially after a pandemic. You're not trying to just
I know.
sit there.
Like I actually had a birthday party. I mean, it was
Yeah.
small and it was totally outside, but it was like, it felt the closest to normal that I have in a minute. Also went out to eat a couple times for the first time over that weekend. Very thrilling birthday, even though in hindsight, probably maybe not like the most of the thrilling. Like I feel like, future
One of the
me
tamer
looking
ones
back,
you've
I think,
ever
like,
had.
really all I did was have people at a pool. But like, considering that I haven't seen some of these people in 14 months, like literally,
Right.
it felt really like I was doing something.
The nice thing about the mid-post pandemic era, the vaccine life, has been that everything that feels like it would have just been like any Saturday in regular life feels like a momentous occasion right now.
Totally. Yeah.
It's like if you go out to eat, you might as
I
well.
know. It was funny. Well, the first time that I went out to eat was the night before my birthday, and it was when Jeremy, my boyfriend, and I were going out, and we tried to make a reservation at some place that would have like a really nice patio because we still kind of didn't really want to eat inside, and there's like limited seating inside here now. And so we couldn't find any place because it's also hard to get a reservation because nobody's like, at full capacity or anything like that. So we ended up going to, Connie and Ted's, which is just up the street.
Yeah. It has a huge outdoor eating
and it has a
section.
huge outdoor, but it's just like essentially in the parking lot. And at the time I was like, oh God, we're just gonna like really for my birthday, I'm gonna go sit like in a fucking parking lot with like a tent over it or whatever. And as soon as I got there, it was like the greatest meal that I'd ever had in my entire life. It did not matter where it was. I didn't need scenery. I didn't need to watch a sunset. I didn't need any of that nonsense. I needed to be at a table that had a waiter and a busboy.
That's right.
And food that I didn't cook.
Right, food that you had nothing to do with that just arrived. Yeah,
that was it.
No, it feels
so. If
like
you're out there thinking that you want your first dining experience to be the perfect experience, whatever dining experience you choose will be the perfect dining experience.
Exactly.
Just hot tip from me.
Hot tip from Brent's Vax life.
Yes, exactly.
Also, if you are a person who is still a person using your computer, which is everyone, we are hosting a trivia night on Zoom in honor of our 400th episode in 2 weeks. Our 400th episode is coming out on May 24th. We're hosting this on May 23rd. We have a Facebook event page set up that you can find if you go to our Facebook page, our Brain Trust Live Facebook page. Come do trivia with us. We did a similar-ish game for New Year's Eve, and it was really fun.
It was so fun.
We have figured out how to do it so that it is not a tremendous bore like so many of the trivia nights that you may have attended during quarantine are. And there will be fun questions about, this last, 2021 political events, but also some of the recurring themes on this podcast that if you have listened at all, you have likely heard about. So I was going to say,
if you want to make sure that you win, you have 2 weeks to listen to 399 podcasts.
Right, to 400 hours of audio. So just get on it. Yeah. You have just enough time.
Don't you want to know our hot takes from the 2012 presidential election?
Primary? In any case, it should be fun. There's an event page set up on Facebook, and we will post all of the Zoom links and such there. If you have a team that you want to play with, we're going to be using breakout rooms, so you can play with a team even if you're home alone. And it's going to be on that Sunday night, May 23rd. So sign up for that. And then we also were not here last week, so we didn't get to talk about the joint session speech, the first Biden speech to Congress.
Yeah.
And we don't have to say much about it because it was, I think, not unexpectedly as boring as you might imagine, which was kind of a relief given how not boring some of these
it was one of those things
in recent years.
Right. Well, I texted Lila and Grant as I was watching it, and I was like, this is actually a pretty great speech as far as Biden's speech is going, because I think it really was. But the portion of that sentence that has "as far as Biden's speeches go" was the important part of that sentence. Knowing that you're not really going to get any sort of it's not an Obama speech.
There's
which
there's
is
no
fine, I
fireworks.
suppose.
Right.
Few, none are. I mean,
Right.
was
Well, and I think it's a relief to have a president give a speech that is a boring speech that you don't feel the need to monitor. Like, we knew
right.
generally what would be in this speech. It was what he promised it would be. It was nothing special or spectacular, but it was fine.
Sure.
I will say one note is that there had been a push earlier in the week on the Pelosi camp side to include a demand to lower prescription drug prices, and the Biden team had been pushing back against it, and he did end up including it. So there was a bit of a flex from the Pelosi genre world in the speech. And then also it was, I think, visually meaningful because it was the first time that a joint session speech has ever had two women standing behind the president or sitting behind the president. So that was exciting.
And it was also totally. And I have sort of mixed thoughts about it because it was sort of exciting getting to hear him talk about so many of the things that he was talking about, because like people noted, and I think rightly so, even though sometimes I like to sneer at these types of statements and just because Biden is not my favorite person, but it was a progressive sounding speech. I mean, it was really had sort of like most of the things that you would want any sort of progressive to say. It hit $15 minimum wage. He pushed the PRO Act. He said that healthcare is a right, not a privilege. But I think that it's always nice to hear those things coming out of the mouth of a president, like on a national stage that like is being carried on every single network. I also feel like, actions, not words,
Right. Well, of course.
You already, pretended as though the Senate parliamentarian was queen of earth, specifically to fuck everybody on $15 an hour minimum wage, which you could have just left in the package and forced everybody to vote on it. And I think it probably would have passed, because what was Joe Manchin going to vote no on it just because that was in the $2 trillion COVID package?
Right.
I don't think so.
He didn't want to give everyone COVID relief for $15 an hour.
And we know that his own healthcare policy, which he is not even pushing right now, by the way. I mean, in the first 100 or so days, have you ever heard him talking about
mentioned
a public option? You haven't.
They mentioned briefly that they were, they put extra subsidies into their relief package, and then they kind of acted like, well, they'd passed his healthcare plan, so they did it.
But his own plans, in so many respects, don't even add up to the things that he claimed that we should be doing in this speech. So like, I think you have to sort of like look at like, is it good that he is out here saying that the government should be doing those things? And like, he's talking consistently about like what the government can do and what the role of the government is in people's lives. And those things are all important, but like, you have to listen to his speeches with a critical ear, because you're often getting sort of like, incongruous words and actions in many instances. So that was sort of like my takeaway. Like, I enjoyed it. It was nice to hear him pushing for like stronger labor unions, but also like, well, what are you doing?
Right. Live it. But that's, I think, for someone like him, that's kind of the first step, because a lot of these policies were things he wasn't even pretending to support rhetorically before. Like he is not someone who actually thinks healthcare is a right. So the fact that he even had to say that against what, that's a common thing that Democrats who don't believe healthcare is a right say, because it doesn't actually mean anything. It's like saying healthcare is a right, not a privilege, is a meaningless sentence that points to no policy in particular. And so Democrats do say that from time to time, or that we need universal healthcare, but they don't specify that they mean that you should be bankrupt paying for your healthcare, but as long as you have it, it's like counts as universal. So he is somebody who oftentimes in the past, especially during the primaries, chose to differentiate himself on the basis of not actually believing these things, even rhetorically, even being willing to say these things. So it's an improvement, at least, that he's sort of hearing that he has to hit those points. That means something. I don't know what it means. I don't.
That's all sort of like I feel like
fireworks, but I'm excited to hear it said anyway.
I feel like him saying these things but not actually meaning them, or like speaking them into existence, is sort of like, it's like the Biden experience, I feel like, to a degree, is sort of like just almost getting there, right? I mean, it's like that's the whole sort of.
In so many ways, the Democratic experience is an experience of empty words, and so if he can even get a slightly farther down the line in his empty words, if his plans are slightly more sort of like in line with his words, then that's an improvement for them.
Right. It was funny. This was actually a separate press conference, but he gave a press conference at some point later. And I was texting you this because I was literally in the process of texting Lila about how impressed I was with him at this press conference, where I think they were talking about his infrastructure plan or something, but they were also talking about like the overall $4 trillion they were going to spend. And he I think gave like what ended up being sort of like a fairly eloquent way of like telling people like straight to camera, like why it is more important that, and why it's a better investment that we make sure that people can go to community colleges for free, as opposed to, you know, letting billionaires keep their extremely low tax rate, right? And
Right.
he explained it really well. And then somebody asked a follow-up question about like, well, would he be willing to compromise on what the corporate tax rate was? And he was like, yes, I'd be willing to compromise, but what I'm not willing to do is deficit spend.
Oh,
And this all happened like in the span of like 30 seconds. Like as I
it's
texted
such a
Lila,
roller coaster
so I
with
had
him.
to change the whole context of my text to Lila, because then I was enraged, right? Like I went from like, good for him. Like this is what the
Right.
American people need to hear. This is what John Q. Public
Right.
is really like needing to have their president tell them about why it's important that we make investments in people as opposed to like the corporate tax rate. And then just fell off the cliff. And I feel like that sort of like 30 seconds like sums up the Joe Biden experience.
Yeah.
And to a degree, that's what the speech was at joint sessions, or
Yeah.
to the joint session of Congress, because it was sort of like, it's all of these things that he's saying that sound good, but he's not really actually doing anything about them.
Right. To be fair, that is what all State of the Unions and joint session speeches
Of course, it's just a litany
And
and a laundry list
I
of
feel
everything
like
that they're
at
going to do
least
that they, I agree.
the nice thing was that they couldn't invite that many guests, so he couldn't spend like 40 minutes in the middle pointing to people and then having everyone clap for them, because that is the part I hate the most about State of the Unions, where they're like, and this 106-year-old woman waited 6 hours to vote, and you're like, listen, great. I would like to hear that you are going to make that never be the case again. I don't actually need to clap for her at the joint session.
Right.
Like it's great that like we don't need to stop for this. This is not helpful for us to clap for her. She shouldn't have had to do this, so we shouldn't have to clap for her. This is not fair to any of us. In any case, if you're wondering how it was received on the other side of the aisle, Mitt Romney fell asleep on camera during the speech, and I wonder if, like so many things that are weird that he does, if his staff is going to try to explain this away by asserting that he's Mormon, so he doesn't know how to like sit in a regular chair at a thing. Because remember when he couldn't sit on a stool, and then they were like, well, he's a Mormon, so of course he can't sit on a stool. Like Mormons had never have an occasion to sit on stools
because he'd never been to a bar.
Because he'd never been to a bar.
As if,
as if, by the way, I don't have stools in my own home that I grew up sitting on. Like stools are everywhere, you guys.
I was going to say, I have very few things that you can sit on in my 1-bedroom apartment,
but you can sit
there are 2 stools.
Exactly. Yeah, stools are ubiquitous. So I wondered if there was going to be a weird attempt to explain away that behavior on the basis of something that made no sense, which is a famous Mitt Romney thing.
Well, it was late, and maybe he hadn't had coffee.
That's true. Yeah, no, he can't drink coffee, so that does make it challenging to stay awake to do your job. And also, I mean, to be fair, Joe Biden's not a, transformative speaker. That said, neither is Mitt Romney, so he should understand the challenges that they're all up against and be prepared for them. Have some sugar, that's all I'm saying. There weren't even that many people there, so it was like usually that the chamber is packed, but because it couldn't be packed, it was like all we could do was watch Mitt Romney snoozing while this speech was going on. So in any case, there's bigger news though to get to this week. Forget about the joint session speech, forget about everything else that's going on. The most important thing for you to know is that Giuliani's house was raided by the feds last week, and that's really the chef's kiss of political news. Like 2 Wednesdays ago, Giuliani's house is raided by federal investigators. That's because he's under investigation for violating the Foreign Agent Registration Act, which is that we've heard about it recently, although we had never heard about it in history because it's what Manafort was charged under. It's the thing that requires agents of foreign governments who are going to lobby US officials to disclose their relationship with the foreign government. So it was almost never prosecuted before the Trump administration, but there have been 3 prosecutions in the Trump administration at a very high level. Paul Manafort is one, Elliot Brody was the other, and then Michael Flynn was indicted under this, but then the conviction was overturned. So there have been multiple Trump officials lobbying on behalf of foreign governments. Almost all of them were Ukraine related, and this one is no different. Basically, the investigation is about into whether Giuliani was lobbying on behalf of Ukrainian officials when he was, first of all, trying to dig up dirt on Hunter Biden and the Biden family, but also when he tried to persuade Trump to oust Marie Yovanovitch. What's her? Is it Yovanovitch? Yovanovitch?
I think so. Yeah.
It's Yovanovitch, right? It's Yovanovitch. You guys, she was in the news for months, but the name, it just has so many syllables. It's like hard to know where to put the stress. In any case, we saw her testify during the impeachment hearings, I think, or the Mueller hearings. I can't remember.
I can't remember.
Like years ago. But in any case, she was the ambassador to Ukraine. She was doing anti-corruption work Ukrainian officials didn't like. Giuliani started lobbying Trump to fire her. And that was at the center of one of his impeachment charges. And so Giuliani, this has been under investigation for a while. Giuliani's role in it has been under investigation for a while. All of this is linked to their attempts to get dirt on Hunter Biden, because it was all linked to an attempt to sort of cozy up to Ukrainian officials in order to get them to spill the beans on, during the campaign on Hunter Biden. And so there's a few things that could happen, because obviously if federal investigators were given a warrant to search his home, then they have some very serious evidence against him. Those kinds of warrants do not just like come about because you have like a hunch that someone has done something. They already have the evidence, basically. They already have the argument. They know what happened.
And specifically, they are often hard to get for lawyers.
Yeah.
Well, and just because there's often like an actual sort of like raid of a lawyer's home really comes sort of like with some, there's obviously been some big thinking that happened prior to this, because there's you don't just go in there and then start looking through things that are privileged also,
Exactly. And so this leaves both Trump and Giuliani in a hilarious bind, because Trump could sort of choose to voluntarily protect Giuliani by making the argument that Giuliani was doing this at his behest, which would mean that he was doing it on behalf of, quote unquote, the American people, because Trump was theoretically sort of in a privileged position at that time to be the kind of, to decide what is and is not public business. So Trump could decide, okay, I will stick my neck out for Giuliani. The thing is that he probably won't, because A, he never does that for anyone. B, he already tried to not pay Giuliani recently for work overturning the election because it didn't work out. And also Trump famously lies under oath all the time. So there's also, the real thing that they have to do is protect him from having to testify. Like his interests are not served by him even being involved in this, because he's not indemnified to the extent that he was while he was president. He has liability now because he's a civilian. And he basically would have to go on the record as a civilian in order to say something that would protect Giuliani. And A, obviously he's an asshole, so he won't do that. But B, that would sort of, that would expose him to some liability, because he will definitely misspeak and say something crazy. Like he can't be trusted to stay on task there. So,
well, and I think he doesn't want to even be involved at all, because I think, hasn't there been a request from Giuliani to even help pay what are going to be his legal fees and things like that? I mean, I think that you're right. It leaves him in a weird situation, because I think he just sort of doesn't want to feel involved in any way. But if he doesn't get involved in some way, then Giuliani is left with only so few choices at that point.
Well, and he doesn't care about Giuliani's choices. The one thing that I think could happen is that Trump could plead the fifth, but he hates people who plead the fifth. He constantly talks about how guilty that makes you look. So there is a chance that gets him, if we can get him on his pride, that we can, because to be honest, I'm not that interested in getting Giuliani. I'm interested in getting Trump.
Of course.
If we could get Trump by way of Giuliani, I don't care what happens to Giuliani. Giuliani's a loony person. He's been out there being loony for years. He's going to keep being he goes to jail or not, doesn't really matter to me.
Yeah.
If we let Trump push all of that Ukraine insider bullshit onto Giuliani, instead of having to take responsibility for basically being an agent for a foreign government while in power, then that's not great in my opinion. So I want them to force him to be involved. I want him to have liability here, that he's open to, or that he's exposed to, because I feel like he's the one that deserves this.
I agree. Is there any world where Giuliani doesn't talk? I mean, would he go to prison for this on behalf of Trump? Here's my feeling.
Listen, he's a wimp, so maybe.
I know.
This is not a world where people don't talk, though. you know, they're from a
Right.
world of backstabbing. So I think, and he's operatic in the way that Trump is. Like, I think, you know, when you have these guys who are operatic in the way that Trump is, it's kind of an unpredictable scenario, because even like Michael Cohen went to jail for him, but like, I don't know what's going to happen with Michael Cohen, because Michael Cohen is a guy with a podcast and a chip on his shoulder right now, who's just like hanging out at home with nothing to do.
Yeah.
Like,
And he's
you
been
don't
weighing in
know-
on this whole situation too.
and he's been weighing in. So like, you don't necessarily as Trump win just because these guys go to jail, because they're willing to talk anytime, basically.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know that, I feel like you are better protected by being loyal to them than not. Obviously, Trump doesn't feel that way. Also, Giuliani is currently trying to hide behind the most hilarious technicalities, because he's claiming that he didn't have a written contract with Ukraine, which is, first of all, not a requirement in the law, and second of all, not how you spy for foreign countries. You don't write written contracts with them. That's not a thing that's out there. That's it's like a, you know,
Yeah.
that's like requiring like, you know, a written contract in order to like tell your friend on the playground that this other guy likes them or something like that. These are not situations where you have a contract. So in any case, Giuliani is currently in deep shit. The feds know something. The feds are no longer protecting him because the feds are not being run by his buddies. The feds being the Justice Department. And Trump is not the guy that you want to be your last resort in a situation like this.
No.
So I'm not really sure what's going to happen, other than that I'm really amused by this whole situation.
Totally.
I am so curious what other fun stuff they're going to find at Giuliani's house, because you know there's a lot of crazy shit going on with him, always. And I just hope that at the end of this, there's a great SNL sketch about all of this, because I think that's what the American people deserve.
I agree.
And after that horrible showing of Elon Musk, they need something.
That's what I was going to say. Did you see that?
I saw the reviews of it and elected not to see it in an effort to protect my eyes. It does not, I saw some clips from it and I was like, well, this cannot go on. I can't watch the rest.
I didn't, and I won't.
No, there's no reason. Don't even click on the clips. Don't find out anything about anything that went on with that. Just know that it was not appropriate for SNL to basically like try to do like an image rehab for like a sociopathic billionaire. So just in general. Speaking of sociopathic celebrities who are also Californian, Caitlyn Jenner's campaign has continued to be in the news for potentially only weird reasons.
I know.
The wrong reasons.
I just sat here and got on my high horse about not watching Elon Musk host Saturday Night Live, but I watched most of the Caitlyn Jenner interview with Sean Hannity on Fox News. So
I don't know how you did that.
I don't know what my taste is about right now, but
I cannot get through like one statement from her without wanting to like chuck my television or computer or phone into a ravine.
Well, that's what it is. And I think, you know, I think initially we were sort of going to talk about how the campaign really does sort of like has this feel of like really still trying to get itself off of the ground, because like she announced, and then after she announced, they went dark for a while.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it was like
it was like they had no launch plan other than to launch.
Right. And I feel like having watched that interview with Hannity, I feel like they should have continued being under construction.
Yes.
Because that interview very much felt under construction, like to the point where like, you know, they launched and she came out with like her campaign or like started claiming that she was a compassionate disruptor, right? Like that's the thing that they're like seem to be going with, like whatever the fuck that means. And Sean Hannity asked her what that meant. No clue. I mean,
I can tell
literally
you. I know the answer. It's forcibly removing homeless people from the streets of LA because her rich friends feel under attack by homeless people.
Yes, her friend who had to clean out their airport hangar as they were fleeing California, and were too mad that they were having to look at homeless people outside. So like it's tough out there for rich Californians, and also like she was doing this in her airport hangar. I mean, her private jet was like nearby. That's where the interview was. So like she's out here trying to talk about like how Gavin Newsom, you know, is disconnected from California because he's eating at the French Laundry while she's next to her like her jet. Like, I mean, that was my main takeaway here, was that like, and I guess I knew this because I did watch that I Am Kate show, right? And like, you know, just from seeing her in the press for a while, you know, like I think we often forget, and I don't know why, or maybe it's just me that's forgetting and I should stop forgetting, but like she is an actual real life idiot person. Like
She's
she's
also
stupid.
could not be more out of touch with every single thing.
But I mean like it, like completing sentences in ways that like made any significant amount of sense or minimum amount of sense, really. It was a struggle. I mean, it was cringy, and the reason that I stopped watching it was not because I was so mad at how terrible it was. It was that like it was giving me the same feelings that I get from like watching a Borat movie.
Yeah.
You know, like that sort of like that secondhand
she's the
embarrassment that like
too.
I don't like. Some people do. Like if that's your thing, then I would recommend you watching the entirety of this interview, dig it up online, because it is deeply uncomfortable. And it's because she's terrible.
Yeah, well, and aside from that, the only thing she made the news for this week was saying that she doesn't think that trans girls should get to compete in girls sports, which is a position that A, no one agrees with really, and B, like when you think about what she's then implying that, you know, we should do, it's like, are we checking children's genitals before we allow them to play sports together? Like, is that your recommendation in this situation? But like, this is why I think we said last week, or, you know, 2 weeks ago when we last recorded, that it was important to make sure that instead of attacking Caitlyn Jenner for her own identity, that we remember that she is just like a fountain of terrible ideas, and that some of those ideas are wildly hypocritical on top of being terrible, and that's fine. But the problem is like a human having these ideas, because being trans doesn't make you a trans ally. It just makes you a person who can be terrible or great. Just like anyone else. It's, you know, and that's, you know, something, I guess, but she is not somebody who's a trans ally, clearly, because she is currently most famous in the news for being the opposite of a trans ally. So, so this is, you know, I think a week that we were given a plethora of reasons to hate her that did not require us to misgender her, but just required us to be angry on a human level, which
I will say one thing that was interesting was seeing Sean Hannity attempt to conduct this interview, because he really wanted to, you know, talk about issues with her, and they did to a degree, but she didn't know anything about anything other than you know, that she hates homeless people, and that she really thinks ICE is doing a bang up job, and that she would continue building a border wall. I mean, you know, like things like that, obviously. But you know, hearing him like do a better job than Joy Behar did with her pronouns was sort of like a wild situation. I'm sure it was probably something that they had to like agree to beforehand. Like, I'm curious, like just the whole sort of like mechanics of that interview fascinate me. Like I would have to have been a fly on the wall of like the two staffs trying to put that together.
That
stabs.
What a what a time. What a challenge.
Right? Wild. Sean Hannity and Caitlyn Jenner.
Who would have thunk it?
Meanwhile, the recall generally is really getting to the look. I don't want this recall. I'm going to vote no on this recall. We shouldn't be having this recall. It's fucking annoying.
It's ridiculous.
But like, secondarily to that, if we're going to have this recall, which it has become clear that we are, I would now like it to become entertaining to me.
That's right.
And I know maybe that's not the best outlook to have. And maybe you might say to me that's how we ended up with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't feel as though that is what's going to happen this time. I don't feel like even Arnold Schwarzenegger had dabbled in politics and had some grasp of both issues and reality, neither of which Jenner has. And there's just not enough. Also, California, we're not in the same state that we are when people were signing this. There are already sort of like some Democratic circles that are trying to you have a certain amount of time, I think until June, to actually remove your name from this list, because this was all obviously in blowback to like the lockdowns that we were having here. It didn't have anything to do with anything else about Newsom's job. I mean, certainly maybe being like, you know, going to the French Laundry was not a great plan. Like while we were in the middle of the
he wasn't
lockdown,
the only politician that got into that kind of trouble. That
he won. You know, he won by almost a 2-to-1 margin. You know, in the election, And he's
Last
against
week-
John Fox, who is running again.
Also, last week, they gave out California stimulus checks. So I feel like another smart thing that he did just now was get checks into people's bank accounts, because the other thing that was happening is people were feeling left behind and desperate, as they would in a crisis where no one seems to be addressing, what those opening up things were about was people feeling economically insecure. That's what the desire to open the economy was about. It was the wrong sort of focus of the problem. But that, I think, in the same way that Donald Trump earned a lot of his votes giving people $600. And that is, I think, something that, that Gavin Newsom just tried so that could get some Californians on his side again, which I think is smart.
Same. But John Cox is out here. He's got a commercial called The Beauty versus the Beast, where he's calling Gavin Newsom the beauty, and then he's calling himself the beast. And he's in this commercial, walking around with a bear, an actual bear. And then he's also been doing all his press conferences, with this bear behind him. I read something the other day that he's mad that all of the press coverage has been about the bear. It's you're going around with a fucking bear. Dude.
Also, nobody cares about what he's saying.
I know, right? And the same porn star who ran in the last time that we had this is running again. I can't remember what her name is. I feel like Gary Coleman probably would run again if he was alive. So would Larry Flint. I mean, so we're getting back to the level of I feel like we're reaching a point that I'm starting to enjoy this as much as one can.
Yeah.
That's something.
I feel like that's all we have really with this.
Yeah.
It's a stupid thing that was based on a moment of crisis in a state where it's just far too easy to recall people.
Yeah.
And it is a state that is prone to circuses like this because it's a state filled with entertainers. Yeah. And so it's this has to be at least fun. Right. It's not going to be productive, so it might as well be a fun waste of money instead of a not fun, unproductive waste of money.
Right, exactly.
Oh, and speaking of not fun wastes of money that are not productive either. Segue.
Boom. Nailed it. Segues.
This Arizona recount that Brent brought to my attention is the funniest thing that's happening in politics right now.
Well, right. I mean, it would be funny enough if the only story was Arizona Republicans are doing their own recount of Maricopa County. I mean, there's comedy in that story.
That's right.
Without the additional story that we're going to tell you about right now. Right. Because the thing that they're doing, as opposed to counting votes right now, is trying to see if any of the paper has bamboo in it. Because somebody on the dark corners of, the conservative fringe interwebs put out some theory that 40,000 ballots got stuffed into ballot boxes that came from China, and they don't make paper the same way that we do there. Supposedly. I don't know. That's coming from the person who claims this. Right?
That feels an incorrect theory.
I don't want to treat this guy's statement as fact about what's going on with Chinese paper, because I don't know. And my guess is that he doesn't know either, because he also thinks that 40,000 ballots were stuffed into ballot boxes in Arizona. So he might not be an expert on on how paper is made across the world.
But they're on the hunt for bamboo, which is going to be easy to find because bamboo is a weed that grows unchecked everywhere in the world. It's one of the most annoying weeds in the world. If you start growing bamboo, you'll never stop.
I'm going to scan over to some YouTube or to some
it's growing in Brent's house. It's growing in yards everywhere. It's growing secretly, probably in your own backyard if you don't know. If you accidentally drop some bamboo in your yard, you might find yourself overtaken by it. It's not a plant that necessarily keeps its distance and stays in check. It's a plant that grows wild. That's why it's so sustainable, because you literally can't stamp out bamboo. So when they talk about bamboo products being more sustainable, and I would contend that a lot of paper is probably made now with bamboo because it is very sustainable. So are other, houses, there's plenty, wood floors, there's bamboo flooring now. Mm-hmm. Bamboo is incredibly sustainable because it's fucking everywhere and it doesn't do anything but grow wildly in every which direction. So I would contend it's not going to be hard for them to find bamboo in Arizona or anywhere. I just don't know that it will point to that it will validate the theory that ballots were flown in from Asia. Also, I love the idea that they flew ballots in from Asia to Maricopa County. That's right. They were just let's find the only flight that's from
I know.
Beijing to Maricopa County, Arizona, and we're going to stuff it with ballots because we, the Chinese, have a real stake in the outcome of that county's electoral vote. Like,
Right.
I mean, it would be, if you've ever tried to work in a group on any project, you would know, as we all do, that a lot of these conspiracies are impossible because they would require people to cooperate on levels that are just not, people aren't capable of cooperating on. Like, this is not no one could have enacted this plan. There's not any group of people in the world that could have enacted this plan, because just doing something simple like deciding on a fucking tagline for an ad campaign requires the input of like 600 dissenting people who all have vaguely different ideas about what that tagline should be, none of which are valid and none of which lead to a conclusion of any sort.
That's right.
So there are no conspiracies, you guys. There's just ridiculous ideas. Yeah. There's conspiracy theorists, but there are no conspiracies.
That's right.
Anyway, COVID's terrible right now, you guys.
Ugh.
This situation in India, well, I have two things to say about it. One being that it's incredibly tragic and also similar to our situation, being driven largely by a lack of political will to do anything to control COVID. Yeah. I would also note that India has actual billions of people and still America has more deaths. So I would also note that we are not in a position to be like, oh, poor India can't get their act together, because we have lost a much higher percentage of our population to COVID than even in the midst of this huge spike in India they have lost. Right. So,
well, and they're basically doing the same thing. They're doing the same thing that we're doing. They're just doing it, 3 months later than we were doing it.
Yeah. Well, and this has been like, I think, again and again, we've seen that you can't get cocky about how well you handled COVID.
No.
Look at what happened to LA this winter. LA, we could not have been more smug in LA about how much more under control COVID was than it was anywhere else in the country. And then it was like one holiday comes and like 1 in 3 people gets COVID all of a sudden. And it gets so bad that they have to tell you not to drive your car because no one will be able to pick you up after your car accident. Like, for almost 9 months, we're just out there smugly sitting around. Like, you actually can't control when COVID spikes in your state. You can just control how many opportunities you give it to spike. And like, you can see this all over the world. Every country that was cocky about the US's crap response got hit. Every city in the US that was cocky about their response, or was cocky about how they aren't New York or whatever it was. I mean, you heard a lot of places being like, well, we're no New York, so we'll never have this problem. Like, lose, 10% of their population to COVID. Like, right. You can't decide that you have solved it and done it. You never get to the point where you get to be like, we handled it well.
No.
The only place that is handling it well is Australia and New Zealand, and they're islands in the middle of nowhere. B, the restrictions that they have imposed to have those low COVID rates have created a situation in which no one who doesn't have thousands of dollars can actually fly home, because you have to pay all this. There's basically a tariff on coming as an Australian citizen to your own country, because you have to pay for 2 weeks in a hotel. And so that's not necessarily an equitable response. I'm glad that they're having a great time not having to wear masks, but like, that's not been an equitable response either. So I don't know that they get to be that cocky about it, because they have more than anyone lost the freedom of movement. So like, you don't get to decide that you've handled it fine. And
no,
and you certainly don't get to throw huge rallies.
Right. Well, and that's what happened, because, their prime minister, like, as we were going through the worst of it, like, at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, Modi said, and I quote, "We saved mankind from a big disaster by saving our citizens from the pandemic." And then, against the advice of his own government scientists, like, opened back up, and the rates were too high at the time that they opened back up. And that is the problem with like opening back up. Everybody sort of like feels like it's like under control, but even here in the US, and thank God we're vaccinating people at the rate that we're vaccinating them, because we all decided to open because we decided to open back up when it had leveled off, but leveled off at a rate that was far too high for us to actually really be opening up, but we just fucking did it anyway. But like I said, thank God, at least 2 million people are getting vaccinated every day, although that's going down because we're entering the phase of
we're hitting the
people being hesitant, right? Yeah. But, they're not doing that there. right? So like they were still it's not as if they were COVID free when they decided to open back up, right? They just decided that like the time had come, just for whatever reasons, political more than science, obviously, because their own scientists were saying, please don't do this. And now here we are. Yeah, they had what's probably considered to be the biggest super spreader event in history, like this big gathering along the Ganges. Like it's a mess. Now they're out of oxygen, like 400,000 people, like cases a day, a few times in the last week. I mean, it is a mess. And they're still not doing any nationwide lockdowns.
No. Yeah, no, that, well, and it's like we keep seeing this happen where countries who feel like they have handled it well and open back up and get into these situations don't learn from other countries' mistakes with that exact same pattern and don't lock down fast enough. Because the thing that you do as soon as this starts to spike is you're just like, okay, everybody go back home. Like this is the moment that you have to go back into your homes. And that's really how they've kept, that's what a lot of European countries have been doing, because they, for all of their, great claims to being able to provide healthcare to their citizens, are not vaccinating them at the rate that we are. Like the US, I think, maybe realized that our only hope, because we're all a bunch of selfish assholes, was to just start vaccinating people aggressively. And I think that's why we're sort of left with only that to pursue, because we can't be expected to cooperate, apparently, in any sort of large scale crisis like this. So
well, that's the thing. I think that so many people here like think that like their lives were in such shambles during this shutdown. And I mean, obviously it wasn't ideal, and I'm not trying to like downplay it, but like, we didn't do the types of things that like these other countries did. You referenced Australia earlier. It was so funny. I was watching, and that was back in January, I guess, but watching the Australian Open, and like literally they shut down the entire city of Melbourne because like 2 people like in one of the hotels that like people were staying at tested positive. And they literally like people were not allowed fucking outside like while they contact traced this. And then like literally 3 days later, they knew every single person who had it by that point, right? And like, and then there were fans back in the tennis court. Like that's what you have to do. And like obviously there was never any appetite to do that here, but like when you talk about shutdowns, like that's what, and India's not going to be able to do that either. I'm assuming that they don't even have the infrastructure to sort of be able to actually go out and do the testing and tracing and things like that. So like I mean, on some level maybe a national shutdown wouldn't do anything, I don't know, but like the idea that like they wouldn't try is sort of bizarre.
You also have to be able to trust, like to do that kind of a shutdown, you have to have a system set up. They were able to do those kind of shutdowns in China, but they were able to send people door to door to make sure that everyone had, was obeying this shutdown, but also had supplies, had food, had access to medical care, was being treated if they had COVID. Like that kind of infrastructure requires a kind of public investment that we don't really make here. And so they really couldn't do that here in the same way, because they couldn't guarantee that we could all have access to the supplies that we needed the way that they would, like there was no central system that was organizing to make sure people were eating during all of this. Like we were just letting our grocery stores sell out of food, and then we were sending people in whenever, so they were crowds in the groceries. Like we had no way of controlling any of this because we had no infrastructure set up to do anything about it. We could have chosen to, but we didn't. And I think you have to have like a fairly large welfare state in order to actually conduct a shutdown on the scale that they were doing in Australia, because there are people without homes, there are people without food, there are people with like out a lot of the things that you would need to survive that kind of shutdown. And the US, like think about if LA tried to do that shutdown, where do you put 40,000 and growing, probably more now, unhoused people during that shutdown in a way that is organized and ensures that they have access to food, clothing, resources, medical care, et cetera. You don't, even though you might fill some hotels, for a couple weeks or whatever. And that is what they should have done with those empty hotels. But like, you don't actually have you don't have a social service network that actually can reach all 40,000 of those people, or 60,000 of them, or however many people it is now. Like that requires a scale of social network that would have prevented the problem from getting that bad in the first place. So
totally.
So I see why we weren't successful at that. And I'm thankful that someone finally noticed that we just couldn't be trusted. So they should just get the vaccines to us really quickly, because we won't cooperate. It's too bad that we're like that. But also it's too bad because some of us were living under those kinds of strict rules for that whole time, and there was no payoff to doing it. And I think that was,
not dying,
like I didn't go into a grocery store for months Like,
Yeah.
I would have gone on only my designated day and panicked about it or whatever, but like there was no way for me to, participate in that kind of system. In any case, some good news, and I think that this is largely thanks to the work of Adi Barkan, who is a Medicare for All activist, a healthcare activist, who is the person, and we had sort of, he and Abdul El Sayed and a few other people have been like, I've criticized them at least in the past for being a little too cozy with the Biden administration for people that don't have any stake in the Biden health plan. Like the Biden health plan doesn't address any of what they believe. However, and like Abdul El Sayed participated in the task forces, Adi Barkan is a friend of his, like they're kind of in the same genre of people. He runs the Be a Hero pack. In any case, he got Biden on the record months ago saying that he would waive the patents for COVID vaccines. That was, he was the one who got Biden to say that on the record. And then for months, Biden tried to back away from it. And then on Wednesday, largely, I think, driven by this situation in India, he finally agreed to waive intellectual property rights for the vaccines, which is I mean, way overdue, way overdue. They shouldn't, but also it's all thanks to the work of progressive healthcare activists that he was backed into the corner of having to do this. And I feel like that is an example of why you want some of those people to be causing a ruckus, even when you feel like it's not fair to be criticizing a new president, or even if you feel like it's not fair to X, Y, and Z. You need someone to be in the room saying we have to do what's moral. Like,
oh yeah, there was no chance short of this India thing that he was going to do this, even though he said that he had. I mean, he did it because he felt like he had to, not because he was on the record saying that he was going to, but because, and I mean, look, I'm glad that he sort of like gets that this is like a global crisis. I mean, I don't even think that like, certainly his predecessor didn't, obviously, but I mean, like, just the idea that he sort of like is able to put the pieces together to know that if it's bad in India, that it might be bad for us here at some point, because like that's what everybody's concerned about, is that all of the, that's, if you allow it to stick around long enough, it, starts to, create all these variants and various things. And like, obviously there's, as you mentioned, the amount of people that there are in India. So like, obviously you have to be able to like vaccinate these people. And also like, there's other, I think something like the large majority of vaccinations that have been put into arms have been done so, in wealthy countries, right? I mean, like India is not the only, like, we're concerned about what's going on in India, as we should be, but like most countries in the world have not been putting any vaccines into any arms, right? Because they just don't even have any access to it. And I think that we decided that we're going to send we bought how many hundreds of millions of AstraZeneca just because we wanted to make sure we had enough. And like, I understand the need to do that, but like, we haven't even approved it and we're just sitting on AstraZeneca supply right now. So I think we finally committed to sending that to places, but that's not enough, obviously. Like, these places need to be able to create their vaccines, and they need to be able to know how to do it, or else we are cooked.
No, there is, in a situation like this, in the same way, like I've advocated a lot of things in this crisis that are not sort of, that kind of violate my overall principles when it comes to healthcare equity. I believed that instead of prioritizing anyone for the vaccine, we should have just been getting them out as fast as possible to literally whoever's arms were nearby. I didn't really care who those people were or what they were up to. I felt like prioritizing people was actually slowing down the process. And we are seeing in other wealthy countries that is actually the case. That part of the reason that vaccines are going into arms so slowly in a lot of Europe is because they're trying to distribute them equitably. And in a crisis, you just can't do that. It's not as effective as just getting them out to people. If you know more are coming, get as many people vaccinated as quickly as possible, and don't ask who they are. And I also feel like, in a situation like this, you don't even wait to, I mean, this doesn't violate my principles, obviously, but like, you don't wait to ask what the pharmaceutical companies think about releasing their patents.
No.
You let them, we paid for that development.
Yes.
In the future, they will make money on that, because in the future, they will be the people who have the technology to give these, to produce these vaccines. And you at a certain point, when everyone in the world has access to them, you can give them back the patents. But you cannot solve a global crisis by allowing private pharmaceutical companies to consider their bottom line over the safety and health of the entire world.
Totally.
And that shouldn't have even been a conversation we were having. And in the early part of this, it was not. in the early part, everyone was like, oh no, we'll release the vaccines. And then you heard suddenly Bill Gates didn't want to do that anymore. And then suddenly, even though Joe Biden had been on the record saying he would, he was like not interested in it anymore. And like that should not have even been a point of conversation in this crisis. This is actually like an emergency where time matters. Like if time matters, then you don't have time to argue these stupid points. You invent the thing to save humanity, and then you get it to humanity.
Well,
and
right.
it doesn't
well, and as
benefit
it is,
us to hold it off, because that's
Right.
our safety is on the line when we do that.
Totally. Well, and as it is right now, the fact that we have waited till now to do it, I mean, it's going to take months to even hammer out like what this looks like, right? I mean, like they're going to have to figure out like how narrow it is and like what information is actually going to be shared, and then these countries are going to have to figure out how to like actually produce these things. I mean, like this is doing this now is not going to save. It's not going to help what's happening in India. I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have done it, because we absolutely should have, but I mean, like this. You're right. To your point, it's just like this is something that should have been the expectation from the second that like something that was invented that worked, that like it should have been able to be accessed by everyone, not like waiting on Joe Biden to decide yay or nay, like just because India's got a bunch of people dying right now, like that shouldn't have weighed on the decision.
I am hoping that these countries are starting to produce bootleg versions for themselves, because that is basically like India has like a huge pharmaceutical production industry. It's if you are someone who can't afford your medicine in the US, you often end up mail ordering it from India. That is like where you mail order cheaper drugs from. So they have a lot of experience producing the same drugs that we are making for way less money, way more quickly. So I'm hoping that just the promise of this is getting some entrepreneur in a country that doesn't have strong copyright laws or strong patent laws to just get on board figuring out at least a bootleg version, so that somebody can get some shots into arms. As long as the bootleg version works, I don't really care where it comes, as long as it's safe enough. Like I feel like that is like we are actually in the kind of crisis where somebody should be proactively violating these patents, is my point.
Yep.
And I know that's also not ideal, because normally I would be like, you want a safety entity to administer these things, you want whatever, and I don't want people in developing countries to have unsafe vaccines while we had safe vaccines, obviously. Right. But I also think that like at a certain point, the formulas for these or whatever they are should be public, and if they're not public, they should be stolen, because somebody should start bootlegging this shit right now.
Well, and I think it's important to reiterate your point here, because I feel like because this all happens behind the scenes, obviously, like you aren't thinking about it. I think a lot of people sort of like may have forgotten that our government, paid billions of dollars, billions with a B of dollars, to these pharmaceutical companies who came up with these vaccines at the beginning of this, that whole Project Warp Speed, basically. I mean, we paid them billions of dollars. And if you think that once they invented them, they are just now giving them to the federal government to distribute out of the goodness of their heart for free. No, we paid for those too. The reason that you are getting the vaccine for free is not because the pharmaceutical companies chose to make $0 from administering the vaccines. It's because the government bought them for them, probably for top dollar. So no one has lost money in this, certainly not the pharmaceutical companies. And in fact, all of their reporting is that they have huge revenue
they've had better
profits during the pandemic. So do not be worried about the pharmaceutical companies now or literally ever. I mean, they're fine, right? Like the government, footed the bill on this, so they're okay.
And if we footed the bill, then part of what we should be able to do is consider our public safety in terms of how we regulate these. And part of what protects our public safety is making sure the entire world has affordable access to these drugs.
That's it.
I mean, that's a public safety imperative for us. So even if you are a selfish person who only cares about yourself, like your safety really relies on people in India getting quick access to these vaccines. So let's just give them the formula. Whatever. It's not it's partly giving them the actual shots, because we have some that we should be providing elsewhere, as we finally did with AstraZeneca, but we should also be doing that. We have a lot of Johnson & Johnson that is not going into arms right now. Like there's other shots that we should just be sending abroad, but also most importantly, give them the tools to make them themselves in an unregulated manner and let them regulate it, whatever country it is. Let the Indian government regulate how they're going to distribute those shots, but don't make it that they can't give them out because they don't have the formula or don't have access to the, information. Like that isn't how you do it.
No.
The entire rest of the world is operating this way, by the way. They're basically taking like generic drug formulas. They're producing them themselves, they're regulating them themselves, and then they're distributing them themselves. And that is why you can get affordable butyrol from India.
Right, exactly.
But like, let that system work in this case, but without anyone having to pay to license this formula.
Well, right, exactly. Well, and I also, my favorite part about this was the left's response was in so many instances was like, do insulin next.
Yes.
Which they should. But I think, one thing when you think about how this vaccine came to be, and I'm not saying that the government obviously has to spend billions of dollars anytime that we need a new drug developed, but I mean, like, if you really sort of like think critically about this, it sort of is a model for like how we continue to have, be able to like, do like the government can do these things, right? Like, and they can fund research and development, like through pharmaceutical companies, like, and then they can pay, maybe not as much as they did in this instance, but maybe they pay like whatever the Medicaid rate is or whatever, like to actually like to make sure people get these things. I mean, like, you can see how this
amount of money for drug development already.
Development anyway.
That's where most of the money for this kind of stuff is coming from. It's from us.
Right. So this idea
that literally paying to enrich pharmaceutical companies and then asking no benefit for that for ourselves. Like this happens all the time.
Right. Let this be the thing that sort of like radicalizes you on the fact that we pay as much as we do for prescription drugs, right? Yeah. Because there's no reason that the people who have the patent for insulin are able to charge you, 1,000 times what they should actually be charging you or what it costs to make, right? Because they're just specifically fucking you for their own
well, and no other country in the world allows that.
Right, exactly.
That's not allowed in other countries. Yeah. In any case, the other thing that happened this week was the CDC reversed their mask guidance for people outside. And it has caused like a cultural breakdown in the streets. In New York City, everyone is still wearing masks in New York City because they're not trying to fuck around. But I've noticed that a few friends who were not in New York for the bulk of the crisis, who came from other places where it was a little bit less serious or whatever, were immediately like, well, then masks off. And everyone in New York has been really careful about it because I think it's more a sign of respect there at this point than it is really a sign that you are protecting anyone from anything. And also in New York City, like, you have to walk in your lobby, the subway, like all these places, you have to walk through a lot of places to get anywhere. So you can't just be
That's what I have been finding too. Because I will see people out on the street who are like not masked, but like even because I have to go walk the dog, but like to get out there, I have to, walk through hallways and things like that. And like we still have signs up in our building that you're supposed to wear masks. So it's like, it's a weird thing to sort of like wander through the entire building and then like for 2 minutes while I'm outside with the dog, like feel like I have to rip my mask off when I've been wearing it for the last year. Yeah. But no, exactly.
But it has created like a weird breakdown of people who are a little too excited to take their masks off and people who are a little too nervous to have other people have their masks off. And it's been interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm not really sure. I'm sort of curious how it's going to develop in a place like New York where you have to have your mask on so frequently.
Right.
And also,
and then people are going to forget to be putting it back on, like when they walk into the subway.
I mean, I've already seen that.
It's like, yeah.
And it's like uncomfortable because, like already you're faced with a lot of uncomfortable situations in New York. Like I was on the subway the other day and usually everyone is really careful to leave a seat if possible between people if one opens, or you like move over if there's an empty seat. And there was a couple sitting next to me and the whole row past them was empty and they just didn't move down. And I was just like, you can't just keep sitting here like this. This is rude. Right. And I finally moved, even though I'm sure they were older. I'm sure they were vaccinated. I'm vaccinated. Yeah. I was just like, I can't live like this, you guys. I have to know that you know the rules.
Right.
In any case, that was the situation that was going on.
Oh man.
That's breaking down everywhere. The Biden administration took our advice on one thing this week, which was nice to hear. Or maybe not this week, but in the last few weeks. Which is they finally decided to send letters signed by Joe Biden to tell everyone that they had gotten the stimulus money. And I don't know about Brent, but I was an intense advocate of this path from the get-go. And even though they said that they kind of acted like they were too good to do that early on when they were asked whether they were going to do this, I was just like, do it anyway. Be tacky. Be as tacky as you need to be. Be as obvious as you need to be. Do a press tour about how you gave that. Like, do everything that you can to take credit for this, because Democrats are terrible at taking credit when they do good things. Right. And that is why no one thinks they're ever up to anything, that and the fact that they often aren't. But when you do something that people like, don't forget to take credit for it. That's politics 101, and they so often do.
I know. So, well, and I think honestly, I think they learned this lesson. I mean, Biden has said specifically that this is a lesson that he learned from the first stimulus package that they passed in the Obama administration, and also which involved, you know, like some payroll tax cuts. I mean, like literally people were like paying less in taxes like on their paycheck, and they did not know why. They had to, like, it had never, really nobody, they didn't notice, nobody had told them that it was going to happen. Like nobody told them why. So I think that and also, you know, I think that they probably saw during the election that there were, you know, a good amount of people who claimed that they voted for Donald Trump specifically because like he had sent them a personal check that he had signed. So I think they at least learned the right lessons here on this one, because I agree with you. It's a ridiculous thing to sort of like have to do, but like, sure, you know, politics is, you know, a constant messaging war, right? And if you're losing it, which the Democrats constantly are, then, you know, that's not a great situation you put yourself in. So like, I'm here for this.
Yeah. Well, especially announced the same week that we learned that the jobs numbers were like a huge letdown. But here's the thing, you guys. Okay. The job numbers were bad. Of course, the job numbers mean nothing, so whatever. But the unemployment rate rose, but there has been a shortage of available workers in a lot of industries at the same time that the unemployment rate is going up, which means that the unemployment rate is not just going up because there aren't jobs. It's going up because those jobs don't pay enough. It's going up because if you have a shortage of available workers and a high unemployment rate, what you have is an employer problem. You don't have an employee problem. Yep. You have a problem where people on the employer level are not paying enough and then complaining that no one wants to take a job that doesn't pay their bills. Nobody wants a job that doesn't pay their bills. That's not really a job. That's an internship. And that no one needs an internship in the service industry. So this is not like people don't work for you out of the goodness of their heart. They work for you to make money to pay their bills. If you aren't offering that, then you aren't actually offering jobs. And that is why you're seeing the unemployment.
And you're absolutely right. And there have been a lot of, I was listening to NPR the other day, and they were like talking to, you know, I think it was just to one business owner. So, I mean, it's anecdotal to a degree, but like they were talking about sort of like their hiring since, you know, as they've sort of like started to reopen, and they claimed that they were having trouble finding people. And then they raised what it was they were paying people. And then they started getting applications. And of course, there are Republicans who are out there being like, well, people are making too much money on their unemployment insurance, which is like, well, then, I mean, look, I have issues that I have voiced on this podcast about the fact that that's the route that we chose to go in at the beginning of this pandemic. But we already chose it, so we can't go back on it, right? Everybody's on unemployment who lost their job. So like, here we fucking are. Could we have done it differently and not been in this situation? Yes. Should we have? Yes. Also, yes. Should the Biden administration, or should anyone have listened to the left as to how to fix this? Triple Obviously. Yes. I mean, like, you know, but here we are, right? So like, these people are technically out of work, and if taking a job that is going to make them more broke than they are now, then no, they're not going to take it. And you're absolutely right. It's not the government's problem that they're sending out unemployment checks. It's the fucking employer's problem that they're not paying enough. And we have known this for decades. This is not a surprise to people, right? I mean,
and also the unemployment money is not money that people are living large on. It would be one if unemployment was paying
they're figures, just able to live.
But it's not even. You can't even live on you can just barely get by on that amount of money. If those employers are not matching an amount of money that is allowing people to just barely get by in low cost of living states, then they are not providing a living in their, like, people only work to make money. No one is just working for you out of the goodness of their heart. Nobody likes working. It's a sad thing that we have to do it. We shouldn't have to do it as much as we do it. And if you're an employer, cannot complain if there is a high unemployment rate. You cannot complain if you can't find workers, because the government is paying people what is barely a living wage in order to have them not starve to death during a huge crisis. And I would guarantee that there are other perks to not working for these people, like not having to constantly expose yourself to COVID, not having to be in a, you know, not, there are, in addition to them not paying enough, there are workplace safety issues I'm sure they're not handling. And I'm sure they're sitting around acting like people are just too lazy to work for them for $7 an hour in an environment where no one is protected from COVID and they don't have any sick leave, and then wondering why that's not working out. Like, you don't actually get to wonder that.
Yeah.
If you want people to go back to work, you have to pay them.
That's it.
Thoughts.
And also, you know, as much as it's important that people be working, you know, for themselves, at least at a job that like does allow them to live, which there should be more of per our conversation that we just had. Also, you know, the markets didn't much care. The Fed is already claiming that they're going to keep the interest rates that they are. And I realize that like some of these things, you know, as we love to say, talk about how fake the economy is here, but like, I think that the idea that there was like so much like initial panic like at the actual number of what the jobs reports were, but like because I think just because people thought it was going to be higher, it was way higher last month, although those numbers were revised down.
They're revised down too, yeah.
But like, you know, this is going to get itself figured out. I mean, I think that we're just coming back from this, like the jobs are going to come. Yeah. We're going to figure out, like, you know, employers are going to figure out what the number is that they are going to have to pay people to get them to like come back to the jobs. Like, we're just sort of like figuring all of this out now, right? Like, I mean, we're just coming back here. People are already panicking about inflation because like there's some things that are like, you know, now like the price of wood is going up because, you know, there's this new housing boon and stuff, but it's like, this is not, there's so many places like in the economy for money to go. I think people are being like, well, you can't just pump $4 trillion into the economy and then like not expect there to be inflation. There's so many places for that $4 trillion to go right now that,
well,
you know,
also, like, we somehow pumped that much money out of the economy by letting rich people just like hold on to it for no reason. And that didn't seem to be a problem. So I don't know why we're suddenly having a problem that if it's back in the economy, it's not like there's been trillions of dollars just like not in circulation this whole time.
Right. Yeah.
That's the Lila Nordstrom economic theory is about redistributing that money, by the way. I've said it on podcasts before, but I still think it's brilliant.
I think it's brilliant too. But I just feel like if you're watching anything about like how, you know, the sky is falling because of this jobs report, or the sky is falling because like maybe wood prices went up a little bit or something like that, like I would contend that, you know, being the economic expert that I am, you should not actually worry about any of those things.
Yeah, he's a person who's purchased the deficit myth. So he's basically about as economically sound as anyone could be.
That's right. Yeah.
In any case, here's a question for you. Tell me what's happening with this Chinese rocket, because I have been too scared to read the news about it.
I think it crashed in the Indian Ocean, like right off the Maldives. I don't think anything terrible happened.
Okay,
I'm gonna look it up.
I just
right now,
I
just
realized,
for up to date info.
I realized
breaking
at a certain
news.
point that I couldn't handle the idea of just like an amorphous apocalypse at them. I just didn't have room on my plate for that. So I was just like, it will be easier if I just don't read the story, and if I die in some sort of weird Chinese, you know, spacefaring mission detritus explosion, then like that would be an extraordinary way to go out. So, you know, I would just chose not to worry about it.
Yeah, I think what you should worry about is that China is posting all of their official updates on WeChat.
That was my main concern with this story. I saw in your notes that the official updates were being posted on just like a casual chat program. And I was like, is this a real space program? Or I don't.
Well, no, I don't think that it is.
Not,
and that, I think that is the point here, because like actually the reason that this happened is because that's how this specific rocket is actually designed to do it. You know, most rockets go up and then like they have like some sort of, you know, system to get the thing that like falls off like once it's into orbit to like come back. I think that's the fancy thing about the SpaceX one, is that it actually like comes back to like where it took off from or whatever, right? But most of them are like controlled in some way, and this one just is not, and it's the one that China is using. This has happened before with them. I think like when they did this, so like this is not new, and I think they contend that like most of it just burns up as it comes back into orbit, which it mostly does, but like not entirely, right? And I think the last time that this happened, it did actually hit in a not heavily populated, but like it hit like some like village in either Russia or Mongolia or something. I can't remember what it was, but like this can't be how we're doing it.
Going to space. Also,
Right?
we don't really need to go to space. So like the better, like if your only option is to go to space and potentially just have like space shit fly and kill people, just like don't go. Like if you can't figure out how to go to space without like harming people on Earth, just don't go to space.
I know. Well,
You
you
don't
know
need
what?
to go to space.
Right. Do you know? Well, some of these rockets, their debris is managed to like go specifically into orbit to where it like stays in orbits for like years or even decades.
Oh yeah, there's like trash. There's like space trash everywhere.
Yeah,
right?
some of those
Where we just,
are
send
like
shit up there and
these
it's, like,
specific
circling.
things from rockets that instead of falling back to Earth are just like now in our orbit.
Just like floating around.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like that either.
I don't either.
I've only seen that in sci-fi movies, but I assume it's true. I don't know. I just, in general, if there's something that is happening, it's like when asteroids are heading for Earth, I'm sort of like, I'm sure I could be nervous about this and weigh in on what's going on here, but I can also elect to be completely, naive about what's happening. And that is a happier place for me to be when it comes to space risks.
Yeah.
One thing I did learn is that Bill Nelson is the NASA administrator now. Former Florida Senator Bill Nelson went back to his roots as an astronaut, because that was what my friend worked for him. He was an astronaut. That's really his claim to fame as a senator.
Huh.
Yeah. So Florida could have had an elderly astronaut as their senator and elected instead 2 goons. So that's what's going on with Florida. It might not surprise you.
Something else is going on in Florida.
Speaking of Florida. Okay. Before we get into this, there's the most important sentence in this entire news story that we're about to talk about. I'm just going to read it to you because it's about Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz doing an America First tour.
This is from the Washington Post, by the way. This is not from some.
Yeah, this is from the Washington Post. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene co-headlined the rally in the Villages, a retirement community northwest of Orlando for adults 55 and older, where Trump enjoyed some strong support and where heated golf cart parades and protests have periodically broken out. They decided to hold the first of what they hope will be a series of rallies where they can repeat all of Trump's lies to various residents in, Florida, in a 55 and older a 55 and older retirement park, where they have been having protesting golf cart parades.
Yeah. That's right.
That heated.
Isn't the population of the Villages like literal? It's like a city.
Yeah, it's huge. The Villages is like a whole like retirement city, basically.
City, yeah.
And it was basically just a Trump rally without Trump. They claim he's going to be attending future ones, but it had the same playlist, which was they start with election lies. They are mad at their political foes. Right now, they're mad at Liz Cheney, so that's who they were hitting on. They think Biden should be impeached. Surprise! They don't like Facebook or Twitter anymore. They're censoring us. They support the Second Amendment. It was the same playlist you're used to hearing. And Greene claimed that she had time to plan this tour because she's been stripped of her committee assignments for threatening other members of Congress. So basically, because she is unable to do her job because she's a threat to her colleagues, she has had time to plan a ridiculous lie-filled rally tour with Matt Gaetz, who's being indicted for, sexual trafficking or trafficking. They're only going to
be able to have so many of these events before 50% of the speakers are in prison.
I was going to say they have to get to this fast because certainly Matt Gaetz might not be around for long.
Yeah.
If this sex trafficking investigation, which he's almost certainly guilty of, even though he denies any responsibility, even though he has appeared with a 17-year-old woman that we all know too much about the situation with, thanks to Tucker Carlson, is still brewing. But he tried to joke about the accusations, saying that the media would probably run their stories on the rally with headlines like Matt Gaetz has wild party surrounded by beautiful women in the Villages, which is I think an insult, like wrapped in a joke, because is he claiming that the women of the Villages, because it's a retirement community, should know that they're not beautiful?
That feels right.
That feels true to him, but just feels uncomfortable to me.
Yeah.
But they were just there to basically, like, I don't know, they're mad at their usual Democratic rivals. They hate Maxine Waters. They are mad at Hunter Biden because of whatever. They don't like Cori Bush. They're mad at Nancy Pelosi, obviously. They're really mad at Liz Cheney, so mad that the Republican conference is actually trying to strip her of her leadership role and give it to Elise Stefanik, which is so funny because Liz Cheney is such a better conservative than Elise Stefanik.
That's what is so crazy. Like, it has become so. Oh, by the way, 140,000 people in the villages. Just
that's
get that in there. Too many. It's like it would be like the third largest city in Iowa, I think.
It's wild.
Yeah, it's crazy because I think that what we have learned with this whole sort of like Liz Cheney thing is like, look, I get why they're mad at her.
Yeah, she didn't want to have a coup.
To a degree. Right. But the whole Elise Stefanik thing, I think really just sort of like gives up the ghost of what they're up to here, because like obviously what is important is not allegiance to conservative values. It's allegiance to a person who is a now twice impeached private citizen.
That's right.
It does not matter that Liz Cheney voted with Donald Trump almost 100% of the time, and something like 30% of the time Elise Stefanik didn't. I mean, she has bad scorecards from
more. No, it's like
Club for
34%
Change
or something.
and like all of the like the tax whatever, people who like track how people vote on taxes and things like that. Like she sort of she went the way of a lot of Republicans in that she was sort of like moderate, and then somehow fell down this like Trump rabbit hole and became completely hoodwinked and is now like a crazy Trump person. But like in terms of voting,
what happened to her was someone made a threat or an offer, because she represents a district that used to be repped by Democrats. She is in a very moderate district, and she is going to lose her seat eventually for this. And so this is about her attempt to get into a different echelon of job. This has nothing to do with her personal values. Her personal values are irrelevant to her situation, just as they were before. And she was before this, she was representing a party that also shared no values with her, because she was a Republican who was voting with Democrats the majority of the time. So this is not something that doesn't come naturally to her. But Elise Stefanik did not fall down a rabbit hole. She seized an opportunity. She's a smart person. She is just a sociopathic kind of person.
I was going to say, I couldn't decide whether that made me like her more or less.
No, I think you should like her less. I feel like I wish she was just like an idiot who was just like up to idiocy. And this is, I think, idiotic in its own way. I don't think this is smart what she's doing.
True.
But this is a strategy. It's not like she suddenly was like, Trump has good ideas. There was an opportunity. There was some kind of offer made to her. It was made the weekend that she announced that she was supporting Trump, even though there was like no logical reason for that, because it shocked everyone. It shocked her allies in Congress. It shocked her constituents. It shocked everyone when that happened. And it happened very fast. It happened overnight. And she, I think, is trying to get into some level of leadership position so that she can parlay that into another job, because her days in her district are numbered.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's what's going on with her, is that they found a sycophant. Liz Cheney, for all of her terribleness, is not a sycophant of Trump's. She is an independent, terrible idea haver. Independently having awful plans. Elise Stefanik listens to the company plan. It's doing that plan. In any case, it's bad news bears over there. Also, there was a story that broke this week that at their last like RNC, convention, leadership retreat, whatever they were doing, they actually lied about Trump's approval rating numbers to the attendees and their donors. Trump's approval rating is not very good right now, even in some of the districts that he carries most strongly. And the RNC is lying about it at the moment. That story broke this week also. So
amazing.
It's a lot. They're all jumping onto a sinking ship. It's very exciting.
Really?
Terrible. I don't know. It's awful. Yeah, that's the news this week.
That's it.
Next week, we'll be back with our last episode before we hit 400, and we will remind you to sign up for our trivia.
Trivia. Yeah. Exciting. And we'll start posting about it on social and various things too.
Yeah, we're going to start posting about it soon. Also, another thing I'll be posting about on social soon is that my book has a finalized cover.
Yes.
So I will be sharing the cover next week with the internet. So stay tuned.
Yeah, you're going to do like a big reveal?
I guess so, because like what else is there to post about with the book? Like I have it. and here's the cover. You can order it. You can pre-order.
When do you
it.
get like an actual like mock-up of the do you get like an actual like copy of the thing?
I think that now
you just get that when it comes out
on demand. I think that, yeah, I think I get a copy of it I get like a bunch of copies of it, I think, when they come out. Because I think that the galleys, they now print on demand. I don't think that they do like a galley run. Because everything is now like easy to do on demand. Like printing books on demand is like a whole thing now.
Got it.
So they don't do like an initial run.
printing of something, or
right. They do like an initial run.
They do, but
are able to ramp it up easily. So they don't do like huge initial runs.
Right.
Or small initial runs and then panic. Like they just sort of are able to like keep up with demand, I think.
Yeah, got it.
In a different way. So
exciting.
It's exciting. But anyway, go like that on social media when it comes out so that I seem popular. So I'll feel good about that.
Yes.
Anyway, that's the news. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye.